make real and urgent what's going on? And how do we make visible white supremacy? Which I think is related to.
It's hard, right?
Yeah, I know. I mean, yeah, I don't think that's a question with an answer, but maybe begin there.
Yeah, I mean, it's a hard question in part because it's so white. In my experience, the white people that I talk to, mostly, you know, middle class, white liberal type people, are allergic to the term white supremacy. And so you say that, and it's like, clear the room.
I know, yeah. My book's a bestseller, I'll tell you.
Yeah, I had a brief encounter with one of the whatever big tech companies that you would recognize if I called their name. And I was trying to do a session with them about whiteness and sort of how, you know, our assumptions about the world shape, you know, for example, the technology that we create, right? And somewhere in that conversation, I used the term white supremacy. And there was anyway, one of the bosses that had hired me to come in to do this talk was like, well, we won't be sharing any of that. It's just like, okay. So I feel like I'm often, you know, it was funny when I was talking with the publisher about naming this book, you know, we mostly agreed on Nice White Ladies. And then there was this whole, I don't know, it felt like months long back and forth about the subtitle, you know, because it's got white supremacy in it. And there was a real, you know, thorough, robust conversation about, are people still going to buy this book if it has white supremacy in the subtitle? And I was like, well, it's a lot in the pages. So.
Yeah. And I think it's an important naming, right? Let's just call it what it is. And it's also, white supremacy is a lot nicer to write about than just saying whiteness, all of us.
Yeah. I don't know. I mean, like you said, there's no answer to the question. It's one I keep grappling with. So I'll let you know what I come up with.
Yes, do. Okay, so in the book, you really lay out clearly in like the first 5 pages, I think, which is very admirable for somebody agonizing over their introduction.
Many revisions to that.
Sorry?
I said many revisions to that. So
exactly. Yes, no, it's writing is rewriting. But you're really good at saying how the system is designed for white women, and in particular, affirmative action. And I think in the context of my readers and my audience and my ever-ending battle to just sort of scourge public education of white supremacy, I really liked how you phrase it. So I'm going to quote you back. And which an affirmative action is a really tricky and meaty concept, right? As is, how do we see how white women are advantaged by it? And I think that's something, if you don't research, it's hard to grasp onto. So okay, the pop culture narratives about affirmative action would have us believe that it is a system that offers unfair advantage to Black, Indigenous, or other people of color. Yet the reality is that it's white women who benefit most, and it is advantage they pass on to their families. And so this is sort of where the personal, like, we are 2 nice white ladies talking about your book, Nice White Ladies, and how to dismantle white supremacy. And I really love, what's really inspiring for me is your fusion of like who you are, claiming your identity, unclaiming it, problematizing it, teasing it apart, and then it informing who you are as a scholar, writer, activist. And you say, of the damage that we nice women have done, you say that your book is a reckoning for it. As well as a roadmap for undoing white womanhood and the destructiveness it causes. And I love that, this idea of undoing white womanhood and the destructiveness it causes. Can you unpack that a little bit?
Yeah. I mean, I think there are so many ways that we who are raised to be white women in this culture have all these kind of structures built around us that are geared for our comfort, our reassurance, our feeling safe in society. I was just reading this terrific review today on LitHub, and I'm just looking up the book now to see if I can find it. by a woman who has a new book. What is her name called? The book is called Safety in the City. And it's sort of talking about reimagining this notion of, there was a time when we did Take Back the Night marches and feminist movement. And she's sort of posing the question, what do we do if we reimagine safety in a feminist and abolitionist lens? And I think that kind of reimagining was in sort of early second wave feminism, but it's gotten lost, you know? And part of what's happened in the, from those early Take Back the Night marches and even earlier feminism in the 70s and 80s is that there's been this kind of takeover by sort of a white perspective, if you will. And I think that takeover has really centered the concerns and causes of white women. And I really think that reimagining our society in a way that doesn't center our comfort is really important. And I mean, you see it in all sorts of ways. I mean, I saw it in just thinking about what I read this morning, that the author of that piece that's writing about it is like, oh, I don't know, this seems like misogyny. And I feel like that's exactly the place where my book makes a contribution, is that we've got to learn to look at white women through a more complex, more nuanced, more intersectional lens. Sure, there are ways that we, as women, as people who are queer, identify as a lesbian, are targeted. Like, we experience misogyny, we experience homophobia, all that stuff. But we're white. Exactly. And so we're part of the system that benefits, I mean, the other piece I was reading this morning is about the horrible, horrible situation at Rikers. And I actually worked at Rikers for a while on a research project. So I always feel this connection to it because I've been in the buildings. I've been on the campus, as it were, for Rikers Island. And, I just thought, I mean, it's a complicated situation, but I mean, I just thought that is a whole system that is built for white women like me living in Manhattan to feel safer in the city. And it just makes me sick to my stomach. And I don't understand why it's not making other people sick to their stomach. So it's sort of, in a way, the book is about, I'm upset about this. Why aren't you upset about it? And this is the teeny tiny bit that I've done in my life. What are you going to do? Is kind of the early reader called it the gentle double dare of the book.
I like that. And it's gentle. It's a very gentle double dare. And your writing style is like not just academic, but it makes a very like logical argument again, like why white people should be abolitionists. Why, if you don't know as a white person what the abolitionist movement is in both history and theory, Google it, right? But I want to sort of go back to you being like, why isn't everybody freaking out about this? Because that's how I feel about public education writ large, but especially BIPOC education and urban education. Right. And so I want to ask you about, well, one, you've survived the ranks of academia. You've seen it. I'm very impressed, because me and all of my sort of anti-Western, I think that's the way to put it, friends, we've all had an incredibly hard time surviving in academia. But you have managed to survive, and you've managed to channel your anger in your writing, which is something that I think I wear my anger on my sleeve too much. And I think it's, for me in my writing and in life, is like balancing out like Sororia Chemale's, woman, rage becomes her, and like using rage as productive, which is, I want to touch back on Karen's rage in a minute, but yeah, how have you reckoned and sort of steeled yourself and survived to do, as you say, as a white lady from the South with KKK hoods in the attic? I inherited this constellation of identities that I have chosen to interrogate and reject. Similarly, I want this book to challenge and subvert both whiteness and ladyhood.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like this is the place where, I was both served well by feminism and then let down by it, and I write in the book about, being heartbroken by feminism. And I think that's really true, that, that there was this way in which feminism gave me this pathway out of the, the family and the life that I grew up in.
Same. And for us to come out as lesbians, right?
Yeah. I mean, one of the jokes I make about it is that there's a parallel universe in which I'm living the life of Chip and Joanna Gaines, flipping houses in Texas.
I love decorating.
It's just like that. So could have been me.
It could be me as well.
Yeah. Anyway, so but yeah. So how did I survive?
How did you hone your anger, and what's your relationship to anger? Because it's like I have all this anger towards white supremacy and my critics sort of attack, but I see myself as sort of like not the salvation, because I don't believe in that, but the hope to move beyond white supremacy I see is through love and joy. It just so happens to be Black love and Black joy.
Right. Yeah, I mean, it's a complicated question, and I want to honor the question as much as I can. I think that the way I handle anger is not, just to be perfectly honest, is not always healthy. I mean, I think that there's been, my own, dealing with alcohol, with food, with all the sorts of things that are around us in the culture that say, here, do this instead, stuff that down. Yeah, stuff that down instead. But I also feel like I've been, sort of at the end of the book, I talk about finding a spiritual practice that helps you, dismantle white supremacy. And for me, that's been really crucial, has been to have a core group of people who remind me on a regular basis about what our shared values are, and who those other people are that I care about. And to me, the driving emotion of that book is kind of love and care.
I got that. When you got to the spirituality part, not as a very quick personal aside, I felt like I have been carving that out and just not knowing how to think of it, and that was really helpful for me.
Yeah, and I think there are. In this world that's so secular now, it's not like it's complicated, right? For those of us who are queer or have a history with the church or whatever, you just can't walk down to the corner Lutheran church and walk in. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about something much deeper. And so I think that part of that has helped me to channel the anger in more healthy ways and healthier ways, like through the writing and and through activism. I think that's really the key. So that too. So I feel like less like a lone voice in the wilderness. I think that doing this work over a long period of time, when I published White Lies, which was my first book, it was my dissertation, that came out in 97.
I know. I remember being
people are like
from 97. This is crazy. This is so ahead of its time. How did you have any? We'll get to the academia and how to survive that question.
Yeah. But when that book first came out, it was very common practice. It was common practice for me to give a talk. I'm talking about academics here, where I would have to say at the beginning, I'm opposed to white supremacy.
Nice.
And that's why I'm doing this, and people totally didn't get that work,
Yeah.
In the part of the point of that early book was I was looking at these broadsheets, printed publications of early white supremacist groups. And I had gone to Southern Poverty Law Center to do those, to gather that archive. And then I was comparing it to sort of mainstream political discourse, political, popular culture, and academic discourse. And I was like, these seem very close to me. So I know all of you white liberals are going, oh, those terrible people on the right, the KKK, but you sound a lot like them here. And I would give that talk in academic circles. And then the first question, the first guy on the mic after would be, yeah, so I hear they do special tattoos. Could you talk about those? I'm just like, you have missed the point.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's, honestly, I think you just encapsulated my entire graduate experience.
Right. Yeah, and actually, that first book has a little bit of my personal story in the preface, which I can send.
That seemed so. Did you get pushback on, because in academia you're always like, oh, don't do me search. Did you get pushback on incorporating your identity into your scholarship, because I think it's the only honest way to conduct scholarship, frankly.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's a lesson I learned from Patricia Hill Collins, and I did a postdoc with her after graduate school.
I'm so jealous.
Yeah, it was amazing. And she really encouraged me to, like, you know, do the positionality thing. I think it's more common now, but it's not as not as accepted. Yeah, no, it wasn't. No, I mean, the reaction that I got within academia to that, I mean, the publisher was fine. They were like, no one reads the preface anyway. The reaction that I most commonly got from people in academia was, why would you do that? And I was like, have you read Patricia Hill Collins? And have you read this book? Because I got to account for
what the Black women say to do.
Yeah, yeah. So they didn't really get it. And then I had one reviewer, that book didn't get reviewed very well, but had one reviewer who said the book was fine or whatever. And then she wrote that the preface was overwrought. And I've thought about that for 25 years. I'm just like, you're underwrought, you know? Anyway, so.
Well, I remember, let's see, I first encountered your work a few years ago because your book was on the shelf of my roommate, Jillian Powers, at the time.
Oh, Jillian, right.
And I read the preface, just sort of, I think I was procrastinating one day and I just was looking at all her books with white people in it because I was, you know, always thinking about it. And I read your preface and it really, like, the blog post that made me go viral was why I left academia. And I received very similar overwrought emotional woman complaints. And when I read the preface to your first book, to your dissertation, I was blown away by the vulnerability that you shared with academic readers, especially because academics are so cutthroat. And I remember being like, this is exactly what Audre Lorde, what Bell Hooks, what Patricia Hill Collins, like, this is exactly what even Gayatri Spivak, in a very complicated Derridian way, is saying this. And it was very inspirational to me to be like, there has been a white person who has done this. And I just can't imagine that it has been easy for you to gain legitimacy in a white supremacist ivory tower.
Yeah, so about that, you know, a couple of things. One, I don't know if you know this part of my story, maybe Jillian told you this, but I actually left academia. I left academia and went to work in the .com after I got my first tenure track job at a university on Long Island in Nassau County and was spectacularly unhappy there, like really just hated it.
I had a lot of friends leave early tenure track jobs.
Yeah, just couldn't, like, for another time over cocktails, I'll tell you stories, but it just couldn't. Nope, not for me. Did not come all this way for this.
Yep. Exactly. Yeah, this is not what I remember, like, almost being glad that I had been expelled before I got to start that route, because I was like, I was never going to last in academia.
This is not my idea of a good time, you know, like,
So nope. .com, that's fascinating.
Yeah. So then, it's a longer personal story, but short version is that I left academia, went to work in the .com, which I loved and would probably still be there with an earpiece and a press pass. And, you know, like we did the Come Chat with the Stars after they win an Emmy, and we'd be backstage for that kind of stuff.
Okay, cool. I love it.
So fun. But, you know, the .com bubble burst and I got laid off along with about 300 other people. And that's when I did the job at Rikers. It was my first sort of step back into academia. It was a project director job. So, you know, now we might even call it an alt-ac. But yeah, anyway, so then I went to work at Rikers. And I mean, there was really something about the work at Rikers, which, you know, will give you some fucking perspective on the world. You know what I mean? Like,
I do.
Like, I didn't get on the tenure track. I hated that job, whatever. I'm not locked up at Rikers. You know what I mean? So, and would have to do a lot to get
problems in person.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So it put everything, you know, career-wise into a perspective. And I started, you know, I have a lot of friends who are actors and musicians and stuff like that. And I just began to think about academia as a gig. You know, it's like a gig, like
it is a gig economy.
Well, it really is, and that also helped me in a particular kind of way, because it made, it made me shrink down my expectations for what this gig could do for me. So when I was doing that Rikers job and various other things, it was around 2000 and let's call it 2005, 2007. It was along in there that blogs became a big thing. And Joe Fagan, who had been my dissertation advisor, he and I used to trade emails all the time. And at some point, one of us, it may have been Joe or it may have been me, and I don't remember, said, we should turn these emails into a thing called a blog. And that's when we started Racism Review. And that was a really interesting time for me, because just in terms of the stuff that you're interested in, because I wasn't teaching full-time, or I think not at all. And I was doing this gig at Rikers, and I still had a PhD, but it was like, what am I doing with my life? And so the blog really was super important for me in terms of like redeveloping my skills and helping develop my voice.
Yeah.
In a way. Yeah. So
how liberating is it to write blog posts after?
Well, exactly.
It's so much more fun. The dialogue is nearly immediate. It's it was great.
So for me, the blog really became like this, it took on a life of its own. And I did that, like there was a time period where I was like a few years where I was writing every single morning something on the blog, which is like,
no, I'm in that content hell. I'm currently in that content hellhole. I understand how that this is the dues I pay, and
it's like the monster in the basement that must be fed.
It is a monster that must be fed. Oh my gosh!
Really quickly, I ended up doing a series of blog posts on the trouble with white women and white feminism that led to a gig with HuffPost as a regular columnist when they had their opinion section, and then eventually to the book. So
I love that.
Yeah.
It's exciting. And that's also so inspiring for me to hear, because I'm like, oh, so I'm just
over.
I'm just early days. I was right with all of these. And also, the thing that I like about having my own newsletter now, and what I like about the blog and that community as well, is I can write whatever the fuck I want.
Exactly.
And in a way